Hello and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives.
Today is going to be a really fun episode. We're going to talk about some common things that men struggle with that a lot of men tell me one-to-one in coaching that I see big patterns in the collective with that I think are helpful for men to understand that they're not the only ones. We're going to talk about things like body image, imposter syndrome, men being painted as like toxic or predators, that they have to be a provider, that they have to be strong. We're going to talk about emotional stoicism. And we're even going to touch a little bit on penis shame and how in culture we do things to men that we're not allowed to do to women and that we know is not helpful to anybody else, yet somehow we've normalized treating men in ways that I think are not fair or that need to evolve.
So maybe we can start with the emotional stoicism, because I feel like that's something that a lot of men can relate to, and it's really common in society. Can you talk a bit more on what does it look like? How does it maybe even like confuse men? And what would be some of the solutions with this, not only for men, but also for women?
Yes, emotional stoicism is one of the common expectations in humanity that we have of men at this time. And we've kind of gone deep diving into this in previous episodes where we really target into content directly related to emotions. But just to touch on it, it's this really unfair expectation of men where we've sort of cut off their emotional legs in childhood. We're like, nope, be strong, be a man, be tough, don't have emotions, don't cry, don't be a sissy, whatever it is. Then we put them in relationships or leadership roles, which are all about relationships, which are all about emotional insight. And then we're like, well, why can't you walk? Well, they can't walk because we've cut off their legs. And we are emotional beings. And like I always talk about, emotions are a navigation system. And emotional stoicism, in order for men to meet this societal expectation, in order to fit in, they have to push down those emotional beach balls we've talked about, which requires a lot of energy, prevents them from being able to connect with their partners or their children or people at work or people when they're out and about in the world as effectively as they would if they had that emotional navigation system to help guide them instead of cutting it off. And it's not their fault we've had to cut, that they've been sort of forced to shut that system down and that it's a bit offline. But it's just this expectation of emotional stoicism. Yet then we put them in men in relationships and we're like, now be really soft and vulnerable, but not when I need you to be strong. And this is something I noticed that I have participated in relationships in the past when I was less skillful and aware than I am now, where I would feel panicky if I thought that my partner was not like being that strong, divine, masculine, stoic strength for me when I wanted that. And then I would expect them to switch into soft and vulnerable and open in the next minute. So it's like men have told me in our one-to-one sessions, they're like, well, I don't know when I'm supposed to be emotional, and then I'm supposed to be strong, and then I'm supposed to be this. And I thought, actually, I think I've participated in that. So I apologize to anybody I've participated in that with. But again, it's this, you're supposed to be stoic. You're not supposed to have emotions, which cuts them off from their navigation system, cuts them off from their full potential in relating to others in a way that creates collaboration and connection and fulfillment. And it requires a lot of energy to suppress those emotional beach balls. And then it's this sort of like really confusing scenario where we're like, be strong, be stoic. I need you to be strong for me. Oh, but now why are you not being emotional? Wait, don't be emotional right now. Like I used to get really upset if men were not upset, but if men were like really sad and crying, I'd be like, oh no, what do I do? Because I was taught, they're supposed to be the strong stoic ones. And it's just an old paradigm that needs to shift as we evolve out of the emotional dark ages.
With this, what do you think would be the new way to change this expectation? How would you describe that the new way versus what is currently not working?
developing our social intelligence, our emotional intelligence, and changing parenting and teaching and just anything that we expose children to, which I think we're already doing a lot of. I think we've already started this correction in our younger generations, but it's the men that are already, in their adulthood that did not get some of that exposure as children. It's being open. It's talking about it. It's creating a new narrative. It's showing them that emotions are healthy and teaching them practical tools to process emotions in a healthy way without impacting others negatively with those emotions or making others responsible for those emotions. And how to not, a lot of men, without realizing it, spend a lot of their time trying to manage other people's emotions because they're afraid of their own. I don't want to say this to my wife in case she says this or that, or my wife is feeling this or that. Therefore, they become defensive and shut down instead of realizing that their women are their wives or their partners are trying to communicate to them. And yeah, it's just a necessary evolutionary leap that we are currently making, and that a lot of the younger generations are already doing a much better job of. But it leaves even a bigger gap in the expectations of the younger workforce that are coming in with maybe boomer or Gen X leaders in place that are not maybe caught up with some of these skills.
And also, what would you say, in case if any men want to share this episode with people in their lives, what would you say to these people that are maybe like you described, maybe not comfortable with men being emotional? Like, what would be your advice to them if they are around men that show emotion or express emotion, or even are starting to learn to do that?
Everybody out there, please just keep trying. Please support each other. Please learn how to hold space. Be curious about each other's emotions. Try not to make others responsible for our emotions, so we have accountability. There's lots of courses and programs and coaches like myself that specialize in emotional awareness and emotional intelligence. And just be really patient with yourself and trust that it's understandable that emotions feel very scary, but remember, they're just a sensation in your body. And when we avoid them, we miss out on the huge value in what emotions are trying to communicate about what is happening in somebody's reality, which will bridge the gap between separation and connection.
Anything else you want to add?
And just think, what would you want somebody else to do if you were, have you ever been angry or sad or in a bitchy mood or jealous or whatever? And when we see somebody else acting that way, if we judge those things in ourselves, we're going to judge it in them. And judging those things in ourselves or others is never helpful, even though it's very common and there's no point in judging yourself for it. But it's just being curious and approaching everything with that sort of curious lens of not, it shouldn't look like, why are you angry? It should look like, oh, explain to me what's happening that you feel angry. And it's okay that you feel angry. It's just trying our best, and we're probably going to get it wrong a bunch of times, but that's okay.
Yeah. So now moving into the physical strength, toughness, and body shame, that men are expected to be really strong. But at the same time, there's a lot of body shame going around that as well.
Yeah, a lot of men over the years, working primarily with men, confess things to me because they feel safe to be vulnerable in our containers. And a lot of them have body shame issues, which at first surprised me a little bit, but it's like almost all of them. And it doesn't matter whether they are overweight, underweight, muscular. I have worked with men who would fit what we would call a classically perfectly male physique. They have body shame too. And it's this societal expectation, like, we used to have for women where they should have large breasts, small waist, long hair, maybe blonde, you know, and we're very much publicly addressing that in society, which I think is wonderful. But slightly less so, we had a parallel narrative that we were expecting men to hold up to a standard. You must be strong and tall and tough and muscular. And if we can talk for a minute about a different, you know, you have to have a large chest. You have to be, you know, men that aren't as tall have a lot of societal shame put on them, or a lot of judgment. And something else that we're just going to jump right into and talk about is penis shame. And that is something that is, you know, we understand as we're evolving out of the emotional dark ages that it's suboptimal to judge or rank women based on the size of their particular body parts. That doesn't mean we're not allowed to have personal preferences. You can prefer large breasts, you can prefer long hair, you can prefer large bums, small bums, big waists, little waists. You can prefer whatever you're allowed to prefer. And women are allowed to prefer whatever they're allowed to prefer. So there's no shame and judgment in that. What I'm talking about more is collective shaming and expectations. And I hear this all the time. I was watching a TV show a couple of weeks ago, and all the women were sitting around discussing one of the men that they were starting to date. And they were like, okay, most importantly, like, he has big hands and big feet. Like, tell me what was happening in the bedroom. Now, if you put that on television nowadays about women, okay, so like, tell me, how tight was she? Or like, I mean, people would flip out if you put that on television. Yet it's okay to do that to men. We do it in songs. We're like, you know, if men are driving funny, we're like, oh, they have small penis syndrome or little man syndrome, or, you know, like all these derogatory ways that we speak about people in something that they can't control. Now, if you think that you'd have more fun in life getting bigger bicep muscles, great. I'll help you create a strategy to fit that into your schedule and help you find the most appropriate physical activity for you. But things like how tall we are, or how large or small particular body parts are, is out of our control. And that's something that a lot of men have sort of told me that they're insecure about. And they think they're the only ones that are insecure about it. And they don't know why they're insecure about it. But I'm like, well, I'll tell you, it's in society, we really are also hard on men, and we hold them to this very narrow standard of, you must be a strong provider who has stoic emotions and big muscles and a large penis, and you must have this, and you must not do this, and you must be sensitive in a relationship, but not too sensitive, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. And you know, and I'm not saying that we don't do that to queer genders or females. We do it to everybody, but we just don't talk about it as much with men. And we tend to blame all of our toxic patterns or our suboptimal patterns or our conditioning in society on men, which I think there is maybe a level of accountability historically, that we were in a fairly patriarchal society. But painting men with terms like toxic masculinity, and, you know, it's just creating more shame, which is the foundation, or which is the cause of some of these maladaptive behaviors that we historically collaborated on. And I always say too, like, we're, as women, we did raise men. We in some way participated in these patterns, and we can identify that a lot of people were hurt. But we can also say, you know, it would be like saying, because I have blonde hair and blue eyes, that I was a colonizer. Or, you know, like, men today are not necessarily in those patterns. And that's another thing that that I think is a little bit unfair to men nowadays, is that we've sort of painted them all with this, a little bit of this predatory brush. So my husband and I were talking about it, because we love having friends over for dinner, and we don't have children, but we love hanging out with other people's children. And we were talking about, as a man, I asked him, like, you know, how do you feel as a man? Like, I can have my friends' kids over, and they can sit in my lap, and I can cuddle them, and I can kiss them. And, you know, like, we have this really cool head scratcher thing. And my husband was like, oh, do you want me to put the head scratcher on you, to this little girl? And then later he's like, am I allowed to do that? You know, or like, you know, and it made me aware that men are sort of, understandably, we do have to have some boundaries, and there was very toxic patterns happening. So I'm not ignoring or invalidating those toxic patterns, or those, I don't even love that word, those old, outdated paradigms. And I think that it can be very unfair and confusing for men who are not participating in that to be painted with some of those brushes. And I was just thinking and trying to have empathy that would be very confusing. And those are things that I don't necessarily even think about. Just like men aren't aware how unsafe women feel most of the time. It's, you know, we're not always aware how men are constantly trying to like, oh, how do I, you know, am I allowed to be alone in a room with this woman? Am I allowed to do this? If I pat somebody on the back, am I going to be a sex predator? Or, you know, am I allowed to laugh and hug a child? Am I allowed to, you know, and I think, you know, we're in this big pendulum swing in humanity. Like that's how we learn. But I just think that it felt important to just acknowledge some of these things to help men heal.
So how could men deal with, or how are these physical traits affecting them, especially knowing that one, they can't really change them, but also people can see that. So it's not something that you might even be able to hide.
Well, sure, if it's something people can see, like another one that some men have told me they're insecure about is small hands, or like a big nose, or bald heads. Like think about how tied to our, not for me, but historically me, not me, current freedom me, but historically how our self-worth is tied to our appearance. And poor men too, their hair's falling off. They get into their middle age, their head kind of falls off their head and sticks to their back on the way down. And you know, and these things happen to men too, and they don't feel as sexy. And that's something else that I see can be unfair. I have absolutely seen my friends with no ill intention talk to their husbands in ways that if men spoke to women in those ways, we would flip out and we'd be like, you're horrible. Like, I'll see women be like, don't eat that. You're getting fat. You can't fit your pants. You know, like they see their men's bellies getting big, or they're like, you know, now imagine if a man said to a woman, don't eat that. Your belly's getting fat. We would collectively come together and be like, oh, crucify them. But the things that we can say to men, you know, I just think it's maybe suboptimal, and maybe worth us just looking at, and all of us being a little more accountable on anywhere and on any gender spectrum, just how we treat each other. And if it's something somebody cannot change, if you're judging a lot of people's physical appearance, it's probably because you judge your own. So then it can be very helpful to go in and do self-compassion and self-acceptance exercises. And if it's something you want to change, I used to be overweight and out of shape, and my hair was very short and it looked kind of lousy. So, I mean, there is things we can be accountable for, and we can change them from a place of, I deserve this. Like, I am this amazing spiritual being having a human experience, and I want to treat my body, my avatar, my vehicle of consciousness really well. I want to protect it like I would a beautiful, rare sports car. Not only, like, I see a lot of men treat their cars or their bicycles or their boats or whatever a lot better than their vehicle of consciousness. So it doesn't have to be from a place of like, I'm so stupid and fat and ugly. It can be from a place of, this thing is amazing and I want to preserve it and optimize it the same as we do to our cars or our boats or our whatever it is that we're into. So again, it can come from that energy of self-compassion. And if it's something you can't change, then you're perfect the way you were created. We're not all meant to look the same. And another sort of perspective on that is also being honest with ourselves. And this is something I've said before too, that I'm sorry, but pretending that looks don't matter in our society is gaslighting. You know, will that be the case forever? Hopefully not, as we heal out of the emotional dark ages. But right now, I mean, if you are very overweight and out of shape, and you don't take great care of yourself, and you don't talk very nice to yourself, and, you're in a cranky mood or emotionally shut down, women aren't going to find you as attractive. Or you're probably going to attract a fairly unhealthy relationship. Same as, I say women, we need to be accountable as well. Not that we have to look good to please our partners, but I ask women all the time when I work with couples, and they're like, oh, he doesn't love me for who I am, which may or may not be true. Then I say, okay, so if he gained 50 pounds, had terrible haircut, dressed awful, and didn't smell great, would you and should you celebrate that? Or would that maybe be a sign that something was not great? And would you help and support them into treating themselves with more love and compassion? And would you be as attracted to them? So, we also can be realistic that we are who we are. And if I had, again, people are allowed to have personal preferences, but if my hair looked terrible and I gained 60 pounds and my joints hurt all the time like they used to when I was heavier, are people going to be as attracted to me? No, they're not. Would somebody still find me attractive? Yes, I'm sure. But it's balancing a bit of accountability, again, treating ourselves with love and compassion like we would a new boat or a yacht or an old vintage car that, men are out polishing and being like, no, don't put any of that kind of fuel in it. It needs the best of this. And I'm going to lovingly wash its exterior. And why not treat ourselves like that and treat each other like that?
I have a question here that I'm still trying to formulate it, but it's along the lines of what's the balance between external expectations and personal accountability, in a sense of if somebody doesn't have that self-worth or they don't perceive themselves as valuable of treating themselves that way, can external be kind of not necessarily a solution, but something that can support that initial starting to do those changes? Kind of what's the balance between them, if there is any? Because I feel like both of them can affect that change into taking that personal accountability.
Right. So again, it's often the energy behind the action we take. So I used to do my hair and wear certain clothes and put on makeup, which I don't really wear much of ever now, but occasionally. But I used to do that from a place of, I hope somebody looks at me and appreciates me and likes me, because I don't want them to see that I'm not worthy and I'm broken and I'm terrible and I don't deserve it and I think I'm ugly. So I have to try to compensate. That's what I used to do. Now I'm like, I like when my hair looks fabulous because I'm amazing and I deserve it. Just like that nice vintage car you're polishing in your garage. I'm like, I love this. I take care of my body and my body takes care of me. I feel amazing when I eat healthy. And look at this. Look at how cute I can make my bicep muscle look when I work out. I think I love that. And having that layer or that foundation of self-compassion. And then also remembering, and this would make me unpopular in certain circles, but I think there's a balance here of not needing external validation. I don't need a lot of external validation, but I also get a lot of it. So would I need it if I didn't get it? I don't know. I have to be honest with myself. The other aspect of that is we are an interdependent, interpersonal species. And when I work with couples or singles, and we go back over and over again to those authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, some of the core, and these are things that most people would not admit that they need, but wouldn't it be fun if we all got a lot of admiration, adoration, appreciation, and acceptance? So safety is the number one value. And we'll get more into this, or need, and we'll get into this more when we do our relationship series. But safety is the number one need. And that's mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional safety. But then think about it. If you have admiration, adoration, appreciation, and acceptance, like, oh my gosh, you look amazing today. Thank you for going to work today and providing this amazing food for our family. You look so sexy. I love the way your ass looks in those pants. You're such a good person. And it's okay that you weren't feeling well this weekend. I love and accept you unconditionally. You know, so anybody who says they don't need that, that's great. And maybe they don't. And I've been definitely in those states. I've been in all those states. But wouldn't it be fun if we just filled each other's buckets? Who doesn't want to be admired? And it doesn't have to be, oh, you're so, you're gorgeous to me. Like, to me, you are the sexiest man that has ever walked this planet. And I love you and appreciate you. Thank you for what you're doing for our family. And it's okay that sometimes you're struggling, and it's okay if you need me to put my arms around you and tell you everything's going to be okay, because I accept you, all the parts of you. Wouldn't that be fun? So anybody who says, oh, you shouldn't need any, oh, we don't need external validation. On some levels of consciousness, that's a partial truth, but why not? It shouldn't be, hey, you look like, you look like this standard in a beauty magazine. Congratulations. But what about the women that do look like that? Congratulations that you look like that. That's great. And congratulations to somebody else that they have the most beautiful eyes, and congratulations to somebody else. It's just celebrating that we are all unique, one of a kind expressions of divinity. There are no duplicates. There are no mistakes. And we're meant to, each one of us, be different. So celebrating that diversity and celebrating that the divinity of that diversity, and congratulating each other and being like, I have so much like appreciation for myself and acceptance that I can't help but to spill it to other people. I will walk up to women and be like, your outfit is amazing. Like, you are crushing it. I don't know how you do that. You look so put together. Or I will walk up to a grocery teller or something, and I'll say, you know what? I always come in your line when I see you because you just have such an inspiring attitude at work. And I just want to tell you that the way you do things really makes an impact, and I appreciate you. And by the way, your eyes are so pretty. I don't even know what to call that color. And people that do, like, when clients want to do one-to-one intensives or immersives with me, they can't believe how that stuff to me now is just a natural. It's not trying to impress people. It's not, trying to butter people up. It's not inauthentic. It's just an expression of, when I used to judge myself a lot, I would judge everybody else because it's all a projection. So I'd be like, oh my God, her butt looks too big, or, oh, that guy's this, or, oh, oh, his hair looks stupid, or whatever. But I just don't feel that way now because I have so much self-compassion that it just spills out to everybody else. And now that, again, doesn't mean that there's not like stuff I'd like to work on. I also appreciate honesty. Like, I don't have a lot of shame nowadays. So if I say to my husband, does this dress look good on me? I'm actually no longer at a stage where I need to be flattered, because I know we fill each other's buckets enough. I know he thinks I'm gorgeous. So if he says, that dress does not look good on you, it's very unflattering, I'll be like, oh, that is so helpful. Thank you. Like, I don't mind. I don't, so, if you're emotional, this is something I talk to people in relationships about all the time. And I have a client right now who's been, he and his wife, I think, are actually a very compatible couple. Sometimes I get couples that I'm like, you guys are just, you bought a minivan and what you needed was a Porsche. This is not, neither of you is going to be able to be happy and authentic in this relationship. But in this case, they're very compatible. They've been in marriage counseling and coaching for years. They've had like 6 different practitioners. And we sat down, and in like 3 to 6 sessions, we're just fine. I'm like, okay. I did like a session with them individually. I'm like, here's what your partner wants. So what does adoration, appreciation, admiration, what do these things mean to you? And if you have this super full emotional bank account, when you make that occasional withdrawal, it doesn't matter. Like with me, if my partner makes an occasional withdrawal, I'm like, it's fine. Like, I've got a diversified portfolio. My needs are met mentally, spiritually, sexually, emotionally, like, I've got a diversified portfolio. I am in wealth and abundance. So if somebody takes $100, no problem. But if you're in a deficit and you say to your wife the littlest thing, and she has a huge reaction, you make that a KPI that you have drained her bank account, and then your job, our job when we're in a relationship, is to take the other person's wants, needs, boundaries, and values as equally important as our own. I really believe that if you're making that commitment. Now both people have to be on the same side, so it's not just like a one person, draining and fixing the other. That has to be a mutual synergy together, a mutual choice. But yeah.
So going into the success and achievement expectation, and with that also comes imposter syndrome, men comparing themselves to others. Can you maybe, before we go into that, explain what is imposter syndrome so that people listening can be up to speed as well?
Well, imposter syndrome is nonsense. Well, I think we should change it, because as soon as we're like, I have imposter syndrome, it's like this other way of devaluing ourselves. Oh, look, it's like this barrier I have. I think it's more helpful to look at it as everybody, mostly everybody on this planet, sometimes feels not good enough, sometimes compares themselves to others. And like I've talked about before with that bicep muscle, if I go to the gym because I want to get a bigger bicep muscle and I start lifting weights and that bicep muscle starts to feel really uncomfortable, I make it mean I'm succeeding. So sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to give this public speech, but I can't because I'm not as good as whatever. Just go, oh, good, this is normal. And then it doesn't create that shame. That shame needs that separation, that I'm the only one that feels this way. No, you're not. I have worked with people 30 years old who make more than $1 million a year. I've worked with people who have everything, PhDs from the best schools in the world. They all have imposter syndrome. They all have it. And especially men, because we did raise them that their self-concept is basically, I am, my worth is what I achieve, how well I perform, and how much money I earn. So just like women's value historically was how small is her waist, how great does her hair look, and how charming and sweet can she be, and how good a cook is she, so yeah.
So with these, how these maybe pressures, external pressures, can affect men internally, or how they even like see or perceive themselves, or even like when it comes to
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Even like when it comes to them or the value that they see, because as you said, like a lot of it is measuring their value based on how much they make, or even like how they look and all that kind of stuff, instead of internally.
Yeah, so that's why when I have the Magnetic Masculinity Blueprint, I have a very specific sequence of events and learning. And one of those first ones is what is often referred to as self-love, but I prefer self-compassion. Like a lot of people, I think it's a valid point that a lot of other people have made. So it's not like that's my unique perspective, but that layer of self-compassion and that layer of authenticity and awareness, so that again, we are achieving from a place of, wouldn't it be fun if I did that? Because it's okay, I might fail, but I think it'd be really fun and aligned for me. And I authentically think it'd be really fun. Or wouldn't my family be so happy if I did this or that, and then we could spend that money on a vacation together? Or wouldn't it be amazing? Why not get a degree? Or why not start a business? Or why not get create a fitness regime? Because I deserve it and I want more, rather than I have to earn this and become this and do that in order to be good enough. So again, it's the energy behind the action we take. So doing that internal work first, those foundations, which I, again, very specifically do things in a very certain order when I work with my high-end one-to-one clients, or even in my group programs. And that is just reframing how we see ourselves and understanding that our worth is by existing. If you didn't have value, you wouldn't be here. You have value. Now, are you showing, sharing, and developing your value? Again, are you doing so? So when I was in perfectionism, which is a coping mechanism, one of the many coping mechanisms for shame. Another one is narcissism. There's lots of them. They're all just shame disorders. I'm not afraid of labels. So when I was struggling with perfectionism, I remember the day I decided, I was so ashamed of, I forget what I had failed something at work or let somebody down or didn't do a good enough job. I was comparing myself to others. And I remember walking on this hike and thinking, oh my God, I know I'm never going to make a mistake again. And I remember thinking I was like a genius. I was like, that is such a good strategy. That's amazing. I'll just never make a mistake again. I'll just be perfect. And then nobody can judge me, which actually meant I won't judge myself, because it's not actually other people judging us that bothers us. It's our agreeing with them. Nobody can hurt you or offend you without your permission. If you don't agree with it, it's not going to hurt. So I'm taking accountability for that, because I'm a big believer in accountability. And now I still am what you would call a high achiever. And I do a lot of things, but I do them from an energy of, I do matter. I am valuable. I am more than what I achieve and how I achieve it. And from that energy, that empowerment, that authentic alignment, that magnetic energy, I've got so much energy where I'm like, I could do this and this and this, and wouldn't this be fun? And wouldn't that be fun? And woo, I failed. Oh, well, I have any things I fail at. I failed at a zillion things, but I don't mind.
Follow up here with question with the failure, because when it comes to even like things that you're talking about, I feel like it would be valuable to touch on failure, and maybe you can describe how you have seen that men look at the failure or how they perceive it versus what you would suggest or that would be good ways to look at it instead.
Yeah. And again, I'd like to just acknowledge for a minute that a lot of things I'm saying are generalizing. So I can't speak that this is how men feel or this. So again, it'd be like saying this is how women feel or this is how LGBTQ plus feel, or, I can't say this is how all men feel. I can speak to my experience, and I can speak to, 100 men that I have direct interaction with. But I would say, for me, I try to remember that failure is evidence of effort and bravery. So if you're not trying and you're not brave enough to try, you can't fail. Or I think one of the common ones is failure is first attempt in learning or whatever. I don't care whatever metaphor resonates to you, but you can't fail without trying. And trying requires effort and bravery. So instead of going, I'm a failure, you go, I'm brave. And sometimes the greatest successes that we achieve come from 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 or 30 failures, right? So whether you're looking at your favorite sports hero, entrepreneur, billionaire, the leader in your industry, ask them or ask yourself, how many times have they failed before they achieve success? So when you fail, I have a client right now who's trying to birth some really big goals and visions. And I tell him, hey, this is big what you're doing. So it's going to require a lot of learning and a lot of failure. So let's just attach a number to it, 27 failures. Now, let's not expect failures. We don't want to take that pendulum too far the other way. But let's say, pretend you're going to have 27 failures. So every time he has a failure, we cheer. We're like, yeah, woo, 1 down, 26 to go. Let's go. 26, I'm 1 step closer to success.
And can we also touch...
And having compassion, think like if your son or your daughter or your best friend or somebody failed at something, would you be like, well, that's what I expected because you're a loser? That figures. Do you know how many people are better than you? So if you wouldn't say it to your child, if you wouldn't say it to your toddler, if you wouldn't say it to your puppy, if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself.
So there's
And
another
if you would say that, to your child or your dog or your best friend, that's okay too. That just means that we need to do a little blind spot or a little shadow work, which I love. So that's fine too.
So I also wanted to touch on one expectation that I feel like it's kind of like contradicting, especially most recently. So it's about men being providers, but at the same time, there's a strong movement with women who tell that I don't need men, I can take care of myself. And for a lot of men, that can be confusing. Can
Yes.
you talk a bit more on this?
Yeah, so this is a big one. And I think, like we often do in humanity, which is valid, it's a valid way to learn, is we take the pendulum from one side and we go, wait a minute, this isn't working. And then we go zing all the way over here. And with the women's right movement, we were like, you know what? Enough is enough. We're not staying here anymore. Zing, we can do it all. We can be mothers and have careers, and we don't need a man. And I think that had a couple of effects, one of which was a lot of women were like left, even those expectations that I had those expectations. I was like, wait, now we have to do it all? All of it? Like, wait, what? Wait, that's not great. We shouldn't have to do it all. Nobody should have to do it all unless they really want to. The other so then women are like, great. Men are like, fine, go do it all then. Fine. And then women are like, I can't do it all. It's so hard. Oh, wait, but I have to do it all. Oh my God. Nobody's meant to do it all. Right? We're supposed to be a little more collective culture. It takes a village, as they say. The other thing I think, and I've talked to men about this, and again, if you don't feel this way, that's okay. And we'd love to hear how you feel too, is that it left a lot of men, well, what do I do? Like, what do you need me for? They got all these strong women, and women are like, don't help me. I can do everything myself. Again, I'm speaking with the mirror. I used to be like that. And my self-concept was very based on, I don't need a man. I can do it all myself. But that wasn't, when we talked before about separating our conditioned self from our authentic alignment, that actually wasn't aligned for me at all. My authentic truth is that I love having a man who's like, who helps out and who can provide and who can, as long as it's in alignment for them. That's the key. So I actually love those things, all the things that I used to look at, like, that woman is weak, or she shouldn't need that. All the things that I judged in others were because I had that unintegrated part of myself where I'm like, I actually love it. And like, I am so in celebration of I love it. Like, I'm like, I cherish what the divine masculine can bring to the table. Like, I love it. And that makes me feel safe and protected and fulfilled and able to, be the best version of myself. But there are other women, and I do like to work. So I've sort of over the years cultivated this exact, that CEO, Sandy, she actually was an authentic part of me, but she can really thrive when I have this safe, secure container. And I appreciate what my man brings to the table. And I tell him every day, he's like, thank you for cooking this amazing dinner from scratch. And I'm like, thank you for buying these amazing organic ingredients for us. Like, again, that's that adoration, admiration, and appreciation, just feeling, acknowledging each other and appreciating each other, and whatever that combination looks like to you. I had a client come to me, who her and her husband are in an unusual role. And what we discovered was she was raised thinking that, her happiness was going to be being a mother. They had fertility challenges. They ended up finally adopting. And very quickly, she learned she strongly disliked that role, which I hear a lot. A lot of parents tell me, I actually hate this job. I love my child. I don't regret it, but this job sucks. I don't prefer this job. And so she was like, she made that mean that she was like broken as a woman. She didn't know what to do. Turns out her husband, who's this biologist, was like, so they finally, I'm like, they had that conversation. He's like, I hate going to work every day. I want to wipe bums, vacuum cereal off the floor. He even learned to sew. He makes his kids lunches. And she's like, I love being the provider. So they both found their perfect authentic alignment, which happened to be compatible, and they love it. And women come up to him at school and stuff, and they're like, oh, you're so amazing. I can't believe you do everything you do. And he's like, everything I do is what you do every day. And he's like, my wife's out earning the money, same as your husband is out earning the money. So those are both important roles, but it's more about authentic alignment. So it's more about owning your truth of, you know, what is the best role for me? I don't have to be the provider just because I am male. Now, a lot of the masculine traits, traditionally masculine traits, again, I understand that there's all genders and that's valid. But those traditional sort of divine masculine traits, which we all have, right? Everybody has that polarity of the divine feminine, the masculine, and some of them meet it sort of in the middle. Some have both, some, you know, whatever it is, we have this awareness now that we, you know, I know when to sometimes, I still sometimes struggle it and step into my masculine when I feel unsafe, or because I was in so many corporate environments that were very masculine. I had to really develop that masculine side, just like a lot of men now are learning to develop that more nurturing, soft, emotional, feminine side. But it's just about, again, if we go back to our parts work episode, it's about knowing when to let which part of you hold the talking stick. And that comes with discernment, mastery, which involves time, effort, failure, and a lot of practice. So it's, that also goes back to our question of men knowing when to be soft and when to be strong and when to be vulnerable and when to be a provider and when to be this. I've got a client who is who's a homicide detective in a very busy city. And so he's all day dealing with some of the hardest to swallow aspects of humanity and society. And then he gets home to his children and his newborn and his wife, who are like, you know, we need you soft and open, and, you know, and then, you know, I've been looking after the baby all day, you do it, you know, and these sort of switches of roles are just something that, not to judge ourselves about, but just to be aware of and constantly sort of, I guess, balance that compassion and accountability and practice knowing when each part of you can hold the talking stick at the table of your consciousness without invalidating either part. So for him, he can't, we've been really working on vulnerability and opening up and speaking his truth, and, you know, going home and saying to his wife, like, I had a rough day. Like, I need you to hold me and tell me everything's going to be okay, because I am like, you wouldn't believe the stuff I had to look at today. And knowing that when he opens up and practices those vulnerable skills, he's like, how am I going to get through my day at work? And I'm like, that is a valid point. You know, it's knowing, telling that part of yourself, hey, you're okay. You can feel sad and angry and all of those things. That's okay. I'm going to schedule time with you tonight at 6 o'clock to sit down and process that. Right now, this part of me is going to hold the talking stick, but that doesn't mean that you don't exist. You know, it's, this guy is the job for this one, but we need to address this guy eventually, because again, if this guy doesn't get the chance to hold the talking stick, at some point he's going to do a hostile takeover and facilitate some of our less adorable, more obnoxious behaviors, or more self-destructive or destructive to others, like cheating or lying or self-destructing or gambling or becoming depressed or binge eating or whatever it is, drinking.
So speaking on parenting, can you also talk a bit more on balancing that men being disciplinary parents, but also being nurturing, and how can men balance that? Because that's another pendulum swing.
So they went from believing they had to be the disciplinarian and the bad cop, or they would be the, I'm never a bad cop, I'm only the fun dad. So there's different dad roles. So they weren't all disciplinarians. Some of them were anti-disciplinarians, or and we're understanding more conscious, loving methods and strategies for parenting now, where discipline is not a word we typically use nowadays. It's not, unless it's like self-discipline, which is something we should all develop a good skill of. So I would invite us to look at what are the most effective parenting strategies and knowing how to soften and how to model behavior for your children. And you want to model that emotional vulnerability. You want to model that emotional openness. You want to model, how do I speak to your mother? How would I have another client who just had a baby recently. And I was like, I like doing a lot of shadow work, and he has a history of a lot of infidelity and getting very frustrated with his partner, which is valid. It's okay. I like working with people wherever they're at. I don't mind any of that. My tagline is no judgments, epic results. I mean that. But I was like, okay, now that's great. You have a baby daughter. So if everything you do, would you want a man to treat your daughter that way? And he's like, oh my God, that's the most uncomfortable thought I've ever had. And I'm like, well, you're modeling to your daughter every day how her future partner is going to treat her. And, and just being willing and being brave. And like, I always say this because I mean it, being like, thank you. If you're a man listening to this, you are an evolutionary leader. You are willing to change the paradigm, to help us shift out of the emotional dark ages, and being willing to do the work and get a little uncomfortable every now and then in order to shift us and help us evolve out of the emotional dark ages. I think it's like the most value we can have in humanity. And whether you're a provider or a caregiver or part of a provider, just remembering that it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be strong, and it's okay to be weak, and it's okay to be all the things. And you're going to be all of those different things at different times, and that you're growing and achieving and expanding from a place of self-compassion and empowerment, and treating yourself like you would that favorite piece of sports equipment, polishing your golf clubs, I watch my neighbor take his bike apart and clean each piece with soap and water. And I'm like, and then down a cheeseburger and an energy drink. I'm like, if we all treated ourselves half as nicely as we treated our favorite possessions or our animals, or, which is just a projection of us, wanting to nurture something that we think deserves it, because often it's a symptom that we don't think we deserve it.
Yeah. So that's the expectations and sometimes frustrations that men might be facing.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything else that you would want to add to this episode?
No, I think we're going to dive into relationships in the next few episodes, which is really one of my favorite topics, and something I'm known for is working with couples and also helping men either create, sustain, or repair their most delicious, divine, sexy, fun, fulfilling, soul-aligned, fantastic relationships.
And also, if you want, or if you have any questions about relationships or anything you want us to address, you can always comment them if you're watching on YouTube, and there's always a link where you can submit any questions or feedback or anything, so that if there's anything you want us to address, we're aware of it and we can touch on it in our future episodes as well.
Yes, definitely.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks. We'll see you next week.